My name's Helen Nicholson, and I'm an archaeologist who lives in the inner west. What I've done is put together a historical site study for the Inner West Council's libraries, and this is the third one. Unlike the first one and the second one I did, which were about specific sites and buildings, so the Marrickville Metro and the Dawn Fraser Baths, this site study is a little bit different because it looks at basically the suburbs of Ashfield and Summer Hill, or the Djarrawunang ward of the Inner West Council. The councils were all amalgamated in 2016, so it's this ward that I'm focusing on. It was previously known as the Ashfield ward, and the ward is named for the magpie. So the site study was created on and is about the unceded lands of the traditional owners, the Gadigal and Wongal people of the Eora Nation. And I want to acknowledge and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. What we're looking at here is actually, it's a fantastic project of the Inner West Council, the Gadigal Wongal Wayfinding Project, which they've 5 wards, and each has an artistic or creative, here a mural, but sculpture placed within them that reflect the Indigenous people that have always occupied and been on these lands. The one you're looking at here is a mural that was done for this ward, and it reflects the long, deep history that is there. And it gives that connection not only to that long, deep history, but it also gives the connection to the vibrant Indigenous community of the Inner West today. A site study is mandated for both stage 4 and stage 5 history syllabus students. And that's the same when we move to the new syllabus that will be introduced in 2027. In the new syllabus, they specify that 5 hours are spent on a site study. A lot of this this site study that looks at that sort of what was the old Ashfield ward, a lot of this site study is focusing more on what is there for stage 5, key inquiry questions. So it's looking about the movement of people, new ideas and technology, the significance of World War II, migration experiences, and sort of global events and changes during this period. So there's a real focus there. But what is great, not only for stage 5, but for stage 4 as well, is that you could tie in this Gadigal Wongal wayfinding project with the site study as well. So, for instance, you could go and visit one of these installations that you'll find scattered throughout the Inner West. The link there is to the website, and each location, there's a YouTube that goes with it that actually explains what's going on. So I would suggest that you definitely merge this wayfinding project with the historical resources and sources that are found with this site study. In the package, you'll have teacher's notes, and the thing to remember is that you're not expected to be an expert on history, the history of this area. So I've given basically a little bit of over a page overview of the area, and in brackets, you will find a number after some of the sentences or in the sentences. Those numbers actually refer to the historical source that backs up that statement. There are questions and worksheets for students, and I've asked for the worksheets that they put the number they are using, the source number, to answer that question. And what that means is that you can just double check the answers by looking at the number and without having to delve through, I think, 47 or 48 different historical sources. So it's trying to make your life a lot easier. There's a little PowerPoint that just to introduce the subject. There's a bibliography. There are websites with a few useful things like converting imperial area to metric area and pre-decimal currency to decimal currency. So what's something, if something was worth £10 50 years ago, what that would be, actually, no, I need to go back 60 years ago, what that would be worth today. So that's sort of the background, and it's hopefully going to make your life a lot easier. All of this, your 5 hours that are required, can all be done in the classroom. But I would encourage maybe going and having a look at some of the sites as well. But it's not essential. You might want to suggest that your students in the school holidays or at the weekends go and have a look. Now, this quote's taken from the Australian Museum's website, and it's estimated that when the British arrived, there were 1,500 people living in this sort of area as far west as Parramatta. So you can see there the ward that we're looking at, the Djarrawunang ward, which sort of encompasses Summer Hill, Ashfield, Dulwich Hill and Croydon Park, and that's where the focus is. I've tried to sort of, because I compare stats, census data, with what was the old municipality of Ashfield, that's why I've concentrated on that sort of Summer Hill and Ashfield suburbs of today. So if we go back prior to European occupation, the area around creeks was quite swampy, but on higher ground there were tall eucalyptus trees that literally were evidently gigantic. And this 1860 painting by Conrad Martins of Canterbury House gives you an idea of how dense the vegetation was. So this is, sort of 70, 80 years after occupation, and you can still see that dense bushland. In fact, it was so dense from what is now Liverpool Road down to the Cooks River. There was a notorious site in the middle of in the early and middle of the 19th century called 7 Mile Hollow, and it was so densely forested that bushrangers were there, and even coaches were held up. And I've included a source about, everybody likes a good bushranger story, so we've got a source about that in there as well. The idea is it's trying to give students an idea of what the area was like and how that has changed over time. So Governor Macquarie commissioned Liverpool Road in 1812, and gradually, and this really was over decades, gradually small little communities started to develop. To give you an idea of how rural this landscape was for quite a while, is that Louisa Meredith had a property at Homebush, or was staying at Homebush, and she gives a description of what it was like to go along Parramatta Road in the 1840s. So she talks about the fact that it was bush and all but enclosed, and then the system of clearing where they literally went along and took down out everything, every tree, every shrub. So you can imagine that you've got this dense forest as you go along Parramatta Road in the area where this site study is, and then you've got bare, raw, and as she says, the ugly appearance of the new place. So to give you an idea, Liverpool Road today and its junction with Parramatta Road, this gives you an idea. But you can see on this 1839 map or plan that's in the State Library of New South Wales, what I want you to notice is you've got Parramatta road running sort of basically diagonally with Liverpool Road running off it. And essentially all the land you can see here is owned by two families. The Underwoods, who are around that Parramatta Road, Liverpool sort of road area, and the Campbells, who are behind them. And they are two really big landholders for this area that this site study focuses on. Now, I've included in the historical sources quite a few plans of the suburb. And the reason I've done this is that today, if you go out to Ashfield, you get the train out to Ashfield and you walk around the streets. You've got these lovely villa allotments with beautiful, beautiful deco and Federation houses, but there are also a lot of apartments. And all that subdivision that made those very equal in size villa allotments and all those apartment buildings have radically changed what it would have looked like 150 years ago. So it's something where you can get students thinking about, okay, we've got open land here, and then we've got a few big houses, and then we start to get subdivisions, and then we start to get apartments being built. So it's about increasing population density, and the types of dwellings that people are living in. And especially for stage 5, this sort of ties into what they look at in history. So I'll just flick through these to give you an idea. We've got here the Ashfield Park Estate. Liverpool Road is running along the bottom with Parramatta Road along the top. And you can see that is all subdivided up to sell. So we're looking there at 1859. The thing that's changing all of this is, of course, the railway goes through the first passenger train from Sydney to Parramatta goes through in 1855. And Ashfield is one of 4 stops, only 4 stops. So, of course, being close to Ashfield Station and being able to zip into town for work makes it a highly desirable place to live. So this is 1859. Here, this is the other side of Liverpool Road. So this is Summer Hill. It says Ashfield, but remember that Summer Hill isn't actually declared. I think it's 1879. So Summer Hill is still part of Ashfield in those days. And you can see how all those allotments have been drawn up. I want you to notice you've got Parramatta Road along the top, and then running parallel to that is Kensington Road, because if we look here, that with the previous one was 1878, if we look at this 1873 plan, Kensington Road doesn't run through. There's a curved street. So Parramatta Road is along the bottom with Liverpool Road running off, heading up towards that top corner. And the plan and design of the streets and the subdivision has changed in just the space of a few years. The other plan that's there is from a later time, and it is actually the previous one's still got Underwood Estate on it, but this is when it is Summer Hill, so it's from the early 20th century, we suspect. State Library of New South Wales actually has this listed as between 1873 and 1937. I did a little bit of a search on Trove and I found that the Otlion Estate subdivision and sales occurred in 1911. So we're looking around that time. And what you'll notice here is that we've got some lovely big large buildings. Keep those in mind because we'll come back to those large buildings that are on the corner of Liverpool Road and Kensington Road. To give you an idea of how much the shopping centre has changed, I mentioned that changing technology and communication with the railway going through the road, Liverpool Road, but this is from the library's own collection. This is actually a view from Ashfield Station looking south towards where the shopping centre and that is today. So if you're getting the train to Ashfield and not on the platform because you won't be able to see anything, but up on the concourse, the bridge that's up there, have a look to the south, and I think you'll be a bit surprised about how different that site is. And students love looking at, the old cars and what things were like. It's certainly not what Ashfield looks like today. So remembering that Ashfield really peaked with that railway going through the subdivision, it really started to change rapidly then. I've also, with the sources, I've asked a few questions in the worksheets about the value and limitation. So what type of source they are and what their limitations are. So for instance, this is from one of the sources, and this is a recollection by a Mr. Henderson in 1923 of him standing with his father at McDonaldtown Station watching the first passenger train go through in 1855. Now you notice those two dates. Mr. Henderson was only 5 or 6 when that happened. And so I've included this because, one, it gives a really good description or a reasonable description of what the countryside was like, but it's a good one for you to use with students to ask them, can somebody who was only 5 or 6 remember what things were like back then? So that's more in there to sort of pick up on sources and what their value are and what they tell us. Now, there were quite a few, as I mentioned. I mean, we had the big properties. We had some we've got beautiful villa allotments, and we had some very, very prominent and wealthy individuals who actually lived in this area. Probably one of the most well known is Sir Henry Parkes, and he lived in Milton House in the 1870s. So unfortunately, he got into a little bit of financial difficulty and he was only there for a few years and he had to sell his Milton house, which was built in 1860. It's actually one of the oldest houses in the area. He had to sell it, but not only that, he had to actually sell all his household effects as well. So I've on the top left-hand side of the plan that's next to it, you can actually see where the house is that is there off Milton Street. And it's called Milton Street, obviously, because Milton House was there. And again, this subdivision that goes through. And so what was a bigger property is reduced down with this subdivision. And that subdivision plan was from 1878. Now, this is Milton House. This is a wedding of very wealthy Quong, well-known Chinese family, the Quong family. This is a wedding photo of a family wedding that was taken in 1923. And it just I've brought this in because, one, it picks up on Milton House and Parkes, but the other reason is that the sources now lean into 20th century migration experience and especially the Chinese migration experience in the 19th and 20th century. So I've got in the sources, there are just some snippets here. There's a very good PDF little thing on the National Archives that I've taken these from, and it just points out the racism and how how exclusive citizenship and residents were. So to give you an idea, if you were a Chinese person coming into New South Wales in 1881, you had to pay a tax, which was £10. It doesn't sound very much, but it's equal to $1,523 today. So if you're leaving Australia today, or if you're coming in and you get a visa, you might pay a few $100s for that, your passport, or for a visa to come in, but you're certainly not paying anything like that amount. And I mean, this is astronomical. And then a poll tax coming in when it was amended in 1887, $18,000. They really did not want the Chinese coming to Australia. And really, this all became law with Federation in 1901. And this is right behind what was the White Australia policy that really was in force until about 50 years ago. So again, it's trying to pick up on this migration experience and the makeup of the population. So Quong Tart is one of Sydney's most well-known Chinese people from the late 19th century. And this is an idea, this is his his sitting room, and it gives you the layout and the decoration, typical late Victorian household, a very aspirational man in the sense that he married a European woman, Margaret, but just to cover cover everything, each of his children were christened in a different church, so Catholic, Church of England, Methodist, Presbyterian. So Quong Tart really was one of the few Chinese people that really fitted into the New South Wales community. And I've given this in one of the questions because there's a picture here of what this room looks like today, and asking students just to look at it and observe how fashions and decoration and interior design has changed over time. As students have skills in all different ways. So some people will think, oh, I don't know how to do this. Other students will love this sort of exercise. Now, the reason that Quong Tart was so popular and successful in New South Wales was that he was an importer of very fine tea, and he opened tea rooms in many ways. I mean, he's not the first, but I like to think of Quong Tart as the person that put Sydney Cafe Society on its on the road. So we might go in and grab a coffee. Uh, if you were around in the late 19th century, you would go and have a cup of tea. And that ranged, everybody patronised Quong Tart's tea rooms and bought his tea from, members of government, consuls, everybody. He was so popular. And that's why that little quote's there. And courtesy of the Powerhouse Museum, next to it is a photograph as the sort of cup that you would have been drinking from if you'd gone to have tea at one of Quong Tart's tea rooms. Notice he's put his initials on there, but this is porcelain. It's gilded and it is enamelled. They're exquisite. This is not really cheap teaware. This is your finest teaware, and that's the where Quong Tart was pitching his teas to, those people. Now, I mentioned earlier about the plans, so, with the subdivision plans, and what I've tried to do, it's not always that successful because you've got the municipality of Ashfield, and now when you go looking for census data and drill down into it, I've gone through reams of census data that you will find on the ABS website. So what we're looking at here are the types of dwellings that were in Ashfield, the municipality of Ashfield, in 1947. So you can see there were 7,597 private houses with just one family living there, ranging right down to there were 2 people camping that had a wagon. So that's what you're looking at with the type of dwellings that were in Ashfield in 1947. And this is picking up on that stage 5 post-World War II, what happened in Australia. We can compare that with here, what we're looking at is country of birth. So census data for 2002, 2011, 2021. and we compare that country of birth with what it was in the 1954 census. So the dwellings we can pick up, there's also another table in the sources that shows how the dwellings change from that 1947 through to the same, the early 20th, first century. And we've got a thing with country of birth. It gets a little bit tricky trying to delve back into earlier statistics because I was really quite surprised that if you go back into the early census, people that were that we would consider were Australian considered themselves to be British. So but anyway, it's quite it's good to compare post World War II, but earlier than that, you can get into all sorts of sort of issues. But I have put in a graph in the sources that show Chinese population in New South Wales and Victoria in the second half of the 19th century, up until Federation, following the gold rushes. So it's just a way to get your students drilling down into data. Also, questions about how reliable is census data. I mean, it gives you numbers that they're quite boring, but it does, they're evidence, they're reliable when you sort of compare them with something like Mr. Henderson, remembering what it was like when the train went through when he was 5 or 6 years old. So all up, the sources, I hope, really bring to life what is an incredibly beautiful, vibrant, multicultural society that you'll encounter and your students will find out about in the Djarrawunang ward of the Inner West Council. Thank you.